Hello.
Hey, Lorenzo. I was just
Hello.
making a cup of tea.
Yep, I'm just having lunch.
Okay.
I was hoping the meeting with Feng to last about 10 minutes, but it lasted about an hour and 40 minutes.
Say that again, please.
I was hoping the meeting with my meeting with Feng to last about 10 minutes, and instead it lasted an hour and 40 minutes.
Ah, I was just on a
difficult to
meeting
plan.
with TTI, and
It's
it was supposed to be here are our challenges, and instead it was we don't know, we'll get back to you. So
Nice.
it.
Hi, Lorenzo and Helena. I haven't seen you in a while.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
So, nice background.
Thank you.
So Lorenzo is at home. You are in the forest. And...
It's a forest just south of Oxford. It's very nice. It's the last moment of freedom.
Good.
I'm surprised you didn't go. Lorenzo's at home. Helena is also at home.
Sorry? Yeah.
What do you mean? Obviously, this is outdoor wear, right? I'm clearly in a forest. It's a very convincing.
Helena lives in a forest.
Yeah. Okay.
No. Helena won't. The Germans won't let Helena into Germany, so Helena is hiding her shame of moving boxes.
Oh. Why don't they let you into Germany? Because you're in Britain?
Correct.
Hi, Ghana.
Hey, Ghana. Nice to
right place.
Nice to see you again.
Hi, Lorenzo.
Hi, Valerie.
So we weren't sure that anybody was going to turn up for this session. There we are. So, because you've had, has everybody had Miriam's message, presumably?
Yeah,
no.
She's on short holidays to her family in Germany.
Yeah. So we sort of thought because she'd sent the paper that nobody would be appearing. Anyway, Dennis, we've got an audience.
Oh dear, right. What do we do about that?
Hello.
Hi.
Apologies for this morning. Failed miserably.
No worries at all.
Having lunch.
Yeah, I've just gulped mine down.
I have a quick question. I saw the paper, was just starting to read, and I have a question about the first line, and that's how far I got.
I haven't looked at all yet. I thought I got till next week.
No, it's a question about the English.
Yeah, the first line was probably written by Miriam of its introduction, and she's in here. So.
Yeah. So the.
I think we'd normally say decades.
Yeah.
In English, if that's the issue.
Yeah, that's the thing. I used since I'm Dutch, I also used the word decennium once, and then I read some English or some dictionary on it that decade is usually used for a period informally between 12 years ending at a 0 to a 9, and decennium can be any 10 years.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Well, that was
we use the word decennial.
Okay.
You know, like biennial or something. Decennial is it's sort of, but I've never seen it written like that before. So
definitely decades.
Yeah. Anyway, if that's the worst problem.
Well, that's how far I got.
So no. Also update you a little bit because I only joined 2 meetings. So I mean, I was supposed to work with Yasmina, and I tried hard to connect to her. And yesterday I finally managed. We had a chat, but she's extremely busy. She told me that she didn't have holidays like from this time past year, and today she planned that it would be her first day of holiday, so she wasn't sure whether she would join or not. And yeah, I wrote some stuff for the data section. It's still not complete, but and I think I changed it after that. So Miriam copied some like preliminary version that I had. And Yasmina is planning to add something to that. She wanted to write about like pharmaceutical data that is not available and which is challenging for modeling interventions. And I think something regarding the economic data that when the pandemic starts, eventually the decisions are just taken without considering the cost that much. But if you are planning to be prepared, then maybe it's also good to discuss that the impact of interventions discussed, and as early as possible, we also do the cost effectiveness analysis, etc. And she wanted to write some kind of cap, and like we wanted to edit the text a little bit more. But I see that she hasn't joined today. She probably was very happy to read Miriam's email. And
I think that's right, because we saw her briefly this morning, and she said she was planning to come just for a very short time, and then she hoped she was going to be on holiday.
Yeah. So yeah, and and I started to look a little bit also at other sections that other people wrote, and I see that there are a lot of things that repeat a little bit, because, for example, we need to talk about the data. So we mentioned, for example, the contact matrices or stuff like that. For example, that they were evaluated only for very few countries post lockdown, for example, for UK and for the Netherlands in particular, but for not many other countries. So, for example, that's challenging, and even the contact matrices don't exist for all countries, or like they're not all of them, let's say, are trustable synthetic contact matrices, etc., etc. And then I see that, that in other sections this is also mentioned. So when we have some text, then we need to see how to switch part of the text and so on. And I also wanted to ask your opinion. I felt like when I was writing that I always go back to COVID and told all my experience with COVID, personal and something else that I saw in other people's work and so on. But it's supposed to be more general, right? We have to comment it for,
if possible.
Yeah, I think that needs to be a bit more maybe like updated. And I think we are getting even, the chapter is getting too big, so we need to cut, which is easier. Cutting is easier than, I mean, shortening the text and then, leaving more essential details. But I thought personally it was a good start. Mm-hmm. There was nothing, and I'm pretty sure that we will just manage.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, the heading is future pandemics. And we want to think about preparedness for things that mightn't be COVID and so on. But obviously, a lot of the challenges that people are becoming aware of are motivated by experiences that are things that are going on at the moment. So I think it'll be a mixture.
Yeah.
But where possible, one wants to try and cast it in a general framework. Mm-hmm. With examples, perhaps.
But this is still, we mainly talk about like viral infections, right? That's the main thread that we experience.
I guess so.
Yeah.
What else are you thinking about?
I don't know, but like Yasmina wanted to mention something about like antiviral treatments, and I thought, antiviral treatments or something. It's a very specific thing, but then I thought also what has there been? Even HIV, it's also viral, and Zika virus and whatever, they're all viral infections. So in some sense, yes.
Yeah, it should be contagious disease, I guess, for a pandemic. Well, you can have other things, but bacterial.
Bacterial infections, they're also sort of infections. But probably, I don't know, the scales are different, or I don't know. It's just for my confirmation.
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, we seem to be restricting ourselves to human, I mean, non-animal, non-plant, whereas the previous, the 2015 volume considered both of those as well as human diseases. So.
Mm-hmm. But then also when we, because I think Hans, or he mentioned that we should compare also to what was in that volume.
I
and so
think-
on. So then you can compare, then you bring COVID a lot. I mean, if you compare, you bring all your experience, and then
Yeah.
you should say that in future, then, okay, this, I mean, probably we can overcome this challenge, or we should take this in mind or that in mind, and so on.
I
Okay.
think Hans's starting point was that if somebody was refereeing a paper,
Yeah.
they would want to sort of convince themselves that there was something new in it. And a starting point might be what had been said 5 years ago. But, you know, those papers were very different in terms of the sort of concentrating much more on technical things. And we weren't in the middle of a big pandemic at the time. So the whole sort of context was very, very different.
Yeah.
But I think it would be useful to be able to sort of point out what the differences are. So, for example, I mean, Dennis mentioned when we were discussing this with Hans, I think, that there wasn't stuff on interventions, particularly in the, you know, in the previous volume. This wasn't something we were really seeing as a big challenge for modeling, whereas now it's, you know, it's everywhere. So I think we can point out some of those. Sorry.
Our content is safe because this was not addressed. I mean, 5 years ago, it was not the focus.
Oh. Well, I think we just want, I think the only concern is to make sure that we're not just repeating stuff that's been said before, or if we are repeating it, we're repeating it very consciously. Because it needs to be repeated.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, what I remember of the previous time, at least the things I wrote, and as well, many of the challenges were how to prove things as well, which we now really don't care about, right?
Lorenza, are you raising hand? Because you have raised.
I am. I was, yeah, so I completely agree. Obviously, things should be different. As far as I remember for what we did in 2015, there was not much about real-time response at the time. There was not much about interventions. This was quite a lot of it was different types of models and the challenges that the models have, whether they are deterministic models, whether they are meta-population models, whether they are network models. But much of it was about the model structure. And I have the impression that many of those challenges are still there, but there's quite a lot of different stuff this time. There is also much more data this time, I would have said, compared to the past. And but I don't want to kind of I would kind of, this is the group about interventions, right? It's the interventions paper.
Yes.
Okay, so I shouldn't talk about other stuff like estimation or modeling.
No. Okay.
But so the entire bit of intervention is new to a large extent.
Pretty much.
And I admit I've only kind of tried to quickly read the modeling paper, but not the intervention paper. But I'd be happy to kind of give it a read and comment a little bit. There has been quite a lot of discussion throughout the pandemic about obviously lockdown and like restricting movements. Contact tracing is another intervention that has been, I'm not sure how much contact tracing has actually effectively done for the pandemic, but certainly there has been quite a lot of work on it, both in terms of in person and in terms of app-based contact tracing. And presumably there is a section on contact tracing already. But yes, I'm not too concerned about the intervention paper in terms of novelty.
But actually, it doesn't have the structure that you think, because you could think that interventions paper should have like sections which are focused like maybe on different interventions or something, but the structure of the paper that it has like data challenges related to modeling interventions, and then challenges related to modeling interventions, and then I think also estimation challenges.
Good. So
And then they're all linked, actually.
Okay, so I should probably just shut up and not comment on a paper that I haven't read.
No, but it's a good point. Like, yeah, that.
No, but my plan would be to read, and if you think I can help on this, then very happily too. But at the same time, I don't want to kind of push myself in if I arrive just now. I just didn't have the mental space to come at any point before.
For me, it's the same actually.
I think all the papers are at a stage where quite a lot of work's been done, but we do need people to look at them and say, what have we missed? Mm-hmm. Because the trouble with writing these things over, excuse me, over a period of time and as a committee is that you somehow lose track of the big picture a bit. And
yeah, and many authors, you just repeat stuff all over the place.
So I'm sure with many of them there are repeats that when we finalize them we need to sort of try and remove, both between papers to an extent, or at least perhaps not to remove but to cross-reference between papers, but within the paper either to remove or to put links in or whatever.
Sorry, given you were concerned, and I think it's right to be concerned that this shouldn't be only COVID. I really like keeping a more general spirit. Then you said we're only talking about humans.
Well, that seems to be in the way it's happening.
Well, yeah, but this is genuine, I don't know. Can you have a pandemic not among humans? Would diseases of animals feature under the name pandemic?
Then it would be a panzootic, right? And demos has to do with people, right?
Yes, but that's right. It would be called something else, but
panzootic.
Panzootic.
Panzootic. I mean, I think.
But you do, don't you? You get some of these bird-type things.
Yeah.
I mean, birds are pretty good at migrating across borders. So.
I mean, I think birds might be the ones that are. I mean, there's rinderpest was swept the whole way through Africa, didn't it? And at one point. But I mean, I think maybe it relates to the stuff about the environment, that humans have messed up the environment sufficiently that the wildlife are not so well connected that panzootics are likely, except among the most mobile species such as birds. But maybe that's being too optimistic. I mean, I think the emphasis was on human diseases, but that's not to say that if we think it's interesting to comment on the differences or the possible lessons particularly possible lessons we might learn from animal diseases. That I think in terms of pulling it together, I sort of feel that someone, I think it was Ghana, was referring to the way the sections have been named. It seems to me the introduction needs to sort of frame that, because it's there are other ways that perhaps sort of hold better together, like looking at the sequence of an epidemic, sort of early intervention through to intervention at the height of a pandemic, and the other thing which Lorenzo there, I think, has made me think of is that if 5 years ago the problem was we found it difficult to imagine that we might have a pandemic in which we thought it worthwhile to fight it with interventions, which is what the decision has been for this one, then if we're trying to anticipate future pandemics, can we be a little bit better with our crystal ball at guessing what kind of challenges different diseases might throw up for interventions? So yeah, I suppose the present one is, roughly speaking, is respiratory. I suppose is perhaps the most useful way of just. I mean, I would guess that most respiratory diseases, if you want to intervene, you would be talking about the kind of interventions we're making with the current pandemic. But obviously, AIDS was spread in a very different way, and what interventions there were very different kind.
Yeah, but if you start talking like that way, then I also felt, for example, because I had to write like about data challenges or something, and you can classify data like biological data, behavioral data, surveillance data, and so on. And if you start thinking about the like sexually transmitted diseases like AIDS and respiratory respiratory infections, then everything changes, because there it's not the number of these contacts or contact matrices matter. You need to know the heterogeneity in sexual contacts, for example.
Yeah.
But I felt like the time scales at which AIDS was transmitted probably were a bit longer than the respiratory infections. That's why I didn't write much. I just included it, and I thought I would discuss with Yasmina what she thinks, because I mean.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and interventions are completely different there also, of course.
So the excuse me, the extra document in the Dropbox. I mean, there's. Sorry, this one I'm going to say just because I'm looking at it with no assumption of what you guys are looking at. I mean, there's the one that Miriam circulated, you know, chapter 4 challenges, blah, blah, blah. And then there's this other one today with Gunnar and Jasmina's initials. Is that incorporated in Miriam's, or do we need to read the two together?
I don't think she copied everything, no, because she also because Yasmina didn't write, like she left a lot of comments, but she didn't write anything. So I think she didn't copy that. And
so we need to read that one as a separate.
Yeah, probably it's.
I mean, that was only sent. In fact, I think it was sent after, or at least the time in the Dropbox is later than Miriam's posting. So.
I think Miriam, what she said also, that, I mean, she will help to combine de novo this manuscript, because if people are changing individual, you know, if you're not working all in the same document, but still working on individual chapters, so they change it dependently from what Miriam needed. Sure. Or if at some point we should start working just in one document, and then you can trace like everything, all the changes.
I think we've found so far that making changes in the separate sections works slightly better in terms of sort of keeping, to begin with, you know, until a certain point, in terms of trying to sort of keep tabs on exactly what's happening with all these sections. You know, it's easier to edit them separately and then recombine, but it depends how many people are commenting and changing things.
And I also have a question, because we need to manage all this bibliography, and she already said like cite the name of the author and then the year or something like that. I mean, all of this would be easier done if everybody types in LaTeX, for example, and you include the bibliography file or something. Is there intention at the end to do that, or it will stay as a Word file? I think it just minimizes the amount of editing that you need to do, sort of. What's your thought?
We haven't, so far, most things have stayed. It's something that's been discussed, but because the numbers of references have typically not been huge, it hasn't mattered too much. The systems for sort of combining editing in LaTeX seem to have, not everybody seems to have found them to work terribly well. But again, it depends how many people are trying to we did do a bit with Overleaf,
Yeah, so we should-
trying that.
or at least at the end, maybe you can put all just the references, and then
Sure.
you
sure.
can add more things, and then because it's mainly text, there are no formulas. Also, it will be
Yeah.
just like
I think for the moment it doesn't really matter whether, I mean, the main point is to capture the reference, and whether it's written in sort of latex style or whatever, it's easy to move backwards and forwards. So
I think Lorenzo and also.
Yeah, I think Helena was first.
Thank you, Lorenzo. I just wanted to raise the point of the focus on human diseases. We could add the additional angle of vector-borne diseases. I mean, zoonotic spillover was already coming to the investigation of the origins of the current pandemic, and there's no reason to assume that some kind of similar spillover may have an impact on future outbreaks. It may not be respiratory. We're already seeing vector-borne diseases in the south of Europe to a much greater extent. So we could potentially include a bigger angle on that, where it's not just human-human interaction, but also human intermediate vector-human interactions again. I don't know whether we should feel bad about infecting mosquitoes with malaria. I guess they technically also are affected by that, but if we want to think of it from the other angle, sorry, to be clear, but that is another angle that we could raise. I'm not sure how well it fits in with the other sections. Perhaps it's a bit excessive to talk about access, inequities, and so on when it comes to human behavior if it doesn't feature in the other parts of the manuscript. But I don't know what people's thoughts are on that.
I don't know. I think maybe in the introduction or somewhere, maybe this can be better mentioned. What is actually the focus, and what do we mean by the future pandemic? And then you can, I don't say that, whether we mainly focusing on like human diseases, but mention also that, I don't know, other diseases, and I don't know, like write a couple of sentences and explain why we look at only at one angle. Or I don't know. There should be a place where you could do that.
Mm-hmm.
Or in the discussion, for example, that we looked at that, but maybe there are other concerns that we should keep in mind, like, vector-borne diseases and stuff like that. Because I have the same problem. I thought like it's way too broad, and after all, I converge a bit to COVID. But.
Hi, Daniel. I don't think I've ever met you. I'm Lorenzo.
Hi, I'm sorry, I had some problems with my connection, so I hope it's stable now. So hi, it's very nice to meet you.
Hi. Connection is the least of my problems. Do you know Helena? Helena works with me.
Nice to meet you all. Peter.
I don't know how many people you've met. I have no idea. Pretty much.
I think the rest of us probably.
Yeah. So
the impression I have, and I repeat, it's my fault for not having read the paper. I still kind of sense that there is not a clear understanding of where the limits or the borders of what we are going to talk about in this paper are. And I suspect that these limits should come from higher up. If it's an entire issue, then I suspect this broadly the same limit should apply to different papers. And I was wondering whether anybody can elucidate that. For example, is the fact that it's a pandemic is a key restriction, or in which case, I don't know whether it applies to, I don't know, plants, for example, but I don't think any of us has expertise on plants, but clearly plants have been wiped out big times over the centuries, but probably that's not what we want. If we don't include animals, I don't see why we should include plants. If we don't include animals, there's a question about whether vector-borne diseases are important. But at the same time, like at the moment, as far as I know, like as was mentioned before, HIV is also a pandemic. So at the moment, there are two pandemics going on. And Ebola was a near miss. yeah, in terms of a pandemic. So basically, we could have either, well, basically, I don't know how far we need to go, and I think that steer should come from higher up. The second question is, we could have like either properly talking about different things like HIV, for example, and COVID, or we could have a section, other pandemics, other human pandemics, where we just briefly talk about HIV and other things. I suspect even talking about HIV, as we were saying, Ganna, opens up a bit too much, because not only the tools and the models you would use are different, but also the goals and the risks are very different. So one of the reasons why we are in this mess is because there is a risk of overwhelming the NHS. And that's purely a timescale issue. If people get infected so quickly that they just arrive in hospital too quickly, you overwhelm the NHS. Overwhelming the NHS for the HIV pandemic is not at the same level, because the NHS has more time to react if things are moving very, very slowly. And so I basically think that directly transmissible infections with an acute infection.
Yeah, I think it's challenging related to a fast-moving epidemic, right? So modeling challenges related to modeling interventions for a fast-moving epidemic. So maybe we should say this in the discussion. So that's what we focus on. And then just in the discussion, like we can add a paragraph saying that, well, this all has to do, for example, with this fast-moving epidemics that for which the transmission route is actually usually the airborne infections, but there are other types of pandemics, for example, where the transmission route is a sexual contact, for example, and then there are other challenges, and then we either write a few sentences that there are just the challenges are slightly different, and the interventions are slightly different, and timescales are slightly different, or maybe we give references to something else, because there should be also references in general about the timescale and how the HIV epidemic or pandemic developed and is developing overall. So I think I would prefer this, because if you say that if you add different transmission routes, then in each section you need to discuss data challenges, but also you need then to discuss data challenges related to HIV, which are also, there are challenges, but then it's too much, you don't know what you're focusing on. So the focus on a fast developing epidemic or outbreak is a good one. I think
how about that some of these things you've said in the introduction. So in the introduction, I think there are two things you could tie together. One is to point out that until this pandemic happened, we didn't think that interventions was such a big thing. Okay, so unlike most of the remaining papers, interventions is something which would not have been a particular topic for a paper, perhaps in a collection, if one had done one 2 years ago. Okay, so I think there's and then you can tie that to saying that interventions are one of the reasons interventions is such a big expanding topic of concern for the present is because it's fast moving. Okay, that so the time scales makes it particularly challenging. And so you set in other words, you set the scene in the introduction in that kind of way, and you say that we will be focusing on this because it's a new topic, there's a lot to say about it, this is what we shall talk mainly about. But then I think before the discussions, I think you should put it as a separate challenge, so perhaps a final section rather than part of the discussion, which is like the sort of black swans. I mean, I think there was in one of the papers of the last set a sort of little black swan section, which is so so this would be challenge other kinds of future pandemic, where you could say two things. Firstly, you could give AIDS, HIV, as a very good example of a completely different kind of pandemic. But we could quite reasonably, I think, not say very much about that, because there's, of course, already a big literature on AIDS and what you do in the way of interventions on AIDS. So we could refer to that. But then also, we should, if at all possible, I think, try and imagine what other possibilities there are. And of course, we're very much in the territory of Rumsfeld unknown unknowns. But even if one just states that there are unknown unknowns, but try and say a little bit more about it. But so this might be quite a short section, but I think it would sort of round off the subject, so you feel more like you really are covering interventions in general.
You're really talking about, or mainly about, non-pharmaceutical interventions, because I mean, in the sense that there's been
there's a separate
lots of work on yes, and there's been lots of work on vaccination going back. And
of course, the part of the vaccination challenge is, it's again a timescale thing, isn't it? I mean, what's very different from normal vaccination is that we've been put in a situation where shortcutting getting a vaccination from being presented with a disease that you want to combat to actually having a working vaccination has been shortened by a factor of 5 or 10 from what's conventional. So there's a very big timescale difference there.
Isn't it a bigger thing which is going on that now we are vaccinating in an ongoing pandemic?
Well, but that's the reason for adopting. Yeah. So it's a reason for changing the principles. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the reason, the logic behind traditional vaccination is really you act almost as though there wasn't a time constraint. You say, here's something that would be worth doing, but we need to do it safely. And to make absolutely sure we do it safely, we shall go through a very careful procedure. Whereas faced with the pandemic, you say that's all very well, but meanwhile, millions of people will be dying. Is it not better to do the vaccine development much more quickly, realizing that that carries a risk of mistakes and side effects and all these things? Because on the plus side, you save millions of lives. So it's very obvious why one takes a different approach. But I don't think it's been done before, not on this scale anyway.
I have another question, which is way more basic and which I should know the answer to, but I don't, is what is a pandemic?
Is what?
What is a pandemic? Because Lorenzo said we have now 2 going on, HIV and COVID, but how about West Nile, malaria, dengue?
Yeah, I was going to say something about that. I was going to ask too, because Elena was talking about vector-borne diseases, and then I remember when the Zika epidemic came, was a big thing here in Brazil, but also in other countries. And then we have to see. I remember it was a spread to many countries, but then what gets in this case to be declared a pandemic?
I think the difference in language, Peter, is that pandemic is a kind of epidemic where, with the implication you're talking about something that starts and explodes, that grows. Endemic is when it's got to some saturation level, but you haven't managed to get rid of it. So it's you maybe have to live with it, or you can think of trying to eliminate it. And of course, we hope to have a paper number 5 in the in the sequence on talking about whether with COVID there are realistic hopes of eliminating it, and if not, how we're going to how we're going to deal with it as an endemic.
But,
So I think AIDS has got to the. AIDS obviously took a long time. So I'm not an expert on AIDS numbers, but I suspect that AIDS as a pandemic to spread around the world, how long did it take to get into all the groups of people? It's now in maybe 20 years, 20, 30 years. But then for the last 20 years, I would have said we've been living with AIDS as an endemic, haven't we?
yeah, that's what my point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's no particular moment at which you say on the 15th of June, 1998, it went from being a pandemic to being endemic. You know, it's nothing like that. But it's conceptually, from a mathematician's point of view, it's going from growth to steady state.
But also, sorry, there's the pan bit, which you sort of tend to think of as global. And I don't know at what point something which is over several countries, but restricted to a particular region, but is not really threatening the rest of the world too much.
I think
At what point that switches over into being a pandemic?
I think WHO probably would not. Is it not very likely WHO have some standard list of criteria? Because I think WHO declare something to be a pandemic at a certain stage, and it presumably is a matter of how widespread it is. I mean, pan basically means all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
And obviously in practice, if there's some small part of the Arctic or whatever that is safe from it, doesn't stop you calling it a pandemic. But
Helena's given
I'm
us
not quite sure where WHO draw the line, but I think, roughly speaking, it's where it's.
Where did you get this, Helena? Was it
Wikipedia, where all ours was.
the definition that you posted? Where did it come from?
The WHO's website.
Oh, okay, so there we are.
So as far as I know, there are. Sorry, Daniel, did you want to say something? You still have your hand up.
There was another point related to this thing about the timescales. Is that we discussed a message that circulated by Robin this week, and then I added some points that maybe we could add to some of the sections on the data. It's like in this case of the COVID-19 was a very fast the spreading of the epidemic, but as opposed to other kinds of diseases. But the thing about interventions is that, well, in the beginning, when we have so little amount of data, then it's the case that the interventions will be more effective. So this is something that a point that I would like to add to these challenges. So I have to see where it would be more the case of adding to which of the sections to add these points to the paper.
So my understanding, if people are interested, that there are six degrees in WHO, and I don't remember, we are clearly at the 6th level, which is a full pandemic. I think it's like 3 is, there is transmission from person to person. 4, there is extended transmission from person to person, and 5 is in multiple countries, and 6 is multiple public health regions in which the WHO separates the world, or something like this. There are
I wanted to know why you mentioned HIV and not dengue or West Nile.
Yeah, but obviously you're right. There is not a clear cut, and there doesn't seem to be a clear cut. The only clear cut that I can see, and this is why I think I'm suggesting an executive decision along the lines that Gunnar mentioned. It's about a fast-moving one. Anything that moves at a timescale comparable to the lifetime of an individual. The concept of epidemic and endemic disease get really confused. If you replenish a susceptible population by birth at the same timescale at which the epidemic is going, then the question whether it's an epidemic or a pandemic becomes very blurred. So and it stops being an emergency. But by
we can deal with it if the time scale is like
Yeah, so a fast moving one would make a lot of sense. I agree. But at the same time, I really feel that this should be a decision higher up. I don't think we can agree here on what we want to put in this paper without this being a common thread across multiple, all of the papers. That's my feeling, at least. And I don't know who needs, Valerie, Dennis, are you higher up enough according to my definition?
I'm not sure where there is that's any higher in terms of, it's a very egalitarian.
Okay, but you are definitely higher up in terms of kind of experience and seniority. So if
No, I'm thinking in terms of formally being editors, but
well, that too. Actually, that's quite important. So
I mean, I don't know. These things are organic, aren't they? It's sort of grown. You know, we started off with the program, which is infectious dynamics of pandemics. So that was, you know, and obviously COVID-19 was a large chunk of what was going on. Then we had a section that was a couple of weeks workshop on future challenges, and this special issue has really grown out of that. So to a large extent, it's what people brought to that workshop as where this has all sort of evolved from. I don't think at any point we really sat down and said, you know, what ought we to be covering? Have we been, you know,
no,
sort of consistent or systematic about what's being included? And I think the problem is now that a lot of the papers are relatively far on. I mean, there's certainly plenty of scope for extra challenges, extra sections, and so on and so forth. But it would be hard to sort of start again and say, hey guys, we're now going to.
No.
So it's just a question. But I think to a large extent, each one is. I mean, it's nice if they hang together as a collection, of course, but to some extent, each one will depend on the small number of authors who are really writing the paper and their interests and their expertise. I mean, we're trying to write as modelers.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dennis.
Sorry, no, I was going to say, part of trying, partly to try and help people take this sort of cross-cutting perspective, that we're trying as far as we can to keep the development of the papers roughly in sync, so that, because, you know, I mean, our ideal concept at the moment is that by this moment, pretty much, or within a very short time, we should have more or less a complete draft of a complete first draft of every paper, which, you know, it's more or less the stage we're at with this one, but there are some I think are a bit behind, and several others that are at a similar stage, because, and then we want certain to send them to people for some outside comment, particularly Hans Hesterbeck has offered to take an overview, but some other people too, perhaps particularly including some people who would probably like to have been involved, but have been so busy they've not been able to be involved in the process. But if they now get something in front of them, they may feel they can come along and make a contribution. And I think what we would like is a period of a month or so, I suppose, during which people get outside comment and which we can all read each other's papers, you know, and try and, you know, help each other to improve. And this may lead to people coming and saying, look, you really have missed out several important things that should be addressed in this, that, and the other paper. And people may, either the existing authors or a new author may come in and help and add in an extra challenge to a particular paper. Or it may be more on the form of, look, you've talked a lot about data in interventions paper, but there's another paper which is called data, which touches on many of the same topics, and somehow these two things could relate to each other better, whether that means transfer of material or cross-referencing or whatever. So we're hoping we're coming into that stage where there will be, everyone has access to the Dropbox. So in each Dropbox, it's easy enough if you look at the last date to find the most recent complete draft and have a look. And in some cases, you'll find this very unrewarding. There really isn't one, but in many of them, you will find there is a draft. and you're absolutely welcome to look at the other ones, and particularly to see if you can pick up any of these cross-cutting issues.
Yeah, the question was basically, has this process occurred, at least you that have kind of seen multiple papers, then whether you can detect a theme that people have shied away from talking about, I don't know, sexually transmitted infections, or have basically they have focused on a particular type of they've circumscribed their territory in a similar way in all the papers. I was just asking this because it seems like a general kind of question that is a trans paper, but I didn't want to.
In a way, it's a worry, Lorenzo, because we want to, the title is Challenges of Future Pandemics, and it's almost inevitable, given where we are at the moment, that a huge amount of people's thinking is related to the current COVID pandemic. But we all know that one of the reasons that some of the responses to this pandemic at its beginning were not very good, were suboptimal, is because people were expecting pandemic flu. And so quite a number of countries, and I think the UK is an example, possibly took some wrong steps early on because this was a different pandemic from what they were expecting. And if we look 5, 10, 15 years into the future to whatever next pandemics get thrown at them, we want to help people be, at the very least, aware that this is a possible mistake. And if we can, maybe suggest a few ways in which things could be different. So, as I say, it comes back to my favorite Rumsfeld quote that there's obviously a huge difficulty in guessing the black swans or the unknown unknowns, but and I think it's inevitable that a high proportion of what's written will relate to be in terms of thinking about the kind of pandemic we're facing at the moment. But I think it's a common theme with all the papers that we are pressing people to try as far as possible to think a little bit more generally.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Sorry, I didn't want to kind of start a really long conversation on this. I was just wondering whether there is certain coherence among different papers, but that's fine. Yeah.
And of course, I mean, a lot of the challenges are, to do with, for example, data and organization. I mean, if you're and platforms and God knows what. I mean, a lot of it is doesn't have to be at the specific level of the data needed for this particular pandemic, but how we treat data sources in general and so on. So, I mean, I think there is hopefully a reasonable amount of generality in at least some of it. But inevitably, it's going to be focused on people's experiences.
Yeah, I very much like Anna's opinion about like a fast-moving one. And plus an extra, maybe like a discussion on something broader.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there will be, I mean, and I suppose that's what's probably missing from most of the papers at the moment is an introduction and a sort of final discussion, because we've tended to say, well, it'll be easier to write those when we've got the main sections in place. But a lot of, and then there'll be an overall introduction to the collection of papers as well. So a lot of these sort of general points can hopefully be made in some of those places to try and say a bit more about the context and other areas.
Makes sense. Thank you. Ganna, you're mute.
Yeah, I'm saying that it would be really nice that I think first we need still like to polish a bit our chapter, then we put everything together and we ourselves have to read and see where we shift things, because things obviously repeat and nothing we can do with that because we work independently. And then it would be really good to have, a few people independent who didn't write it, just read it and, and give comments. And as for me, those people, they can contribute as well to this paper, because I think that contribution is important to have, just to dive into and give really good comments so that we can improve it. I mean, maybe Lorenzo, you can do it if you're or I mean, if you want, or I don't know, whoever. I think whoever has a bigger vision. Or maybe Dennis and Valerie, that you can invite people from other groups you're coordinating.
Well, that's of course another option is by getting people from other groups to read them because they bring that. With all these things, of course, it's a question of people's time. I think with it for each paper, when it gets to the stage of something that as a first draft you're reasonably happy with, and then just think about who one might ask to read it and send it out. I mean, that's what we've started to do, at least with one paper's gone out to various people to comment on.
Are there other things that we need to discuss? I have to leave soon, unfortunately.
That's fine.
That's all.
I think our main thing is as set by Miriam to.
Can I ask, what's the latest draft? So we are working on Word documents and we are putting them on the Dropbox, right? There is no kind of joint online thing that everybody's commenting on. What's the latest draft? Is on the Dropbox the one with the latest date fundamentally?
I think that it's the thing that Miriam posted, which is Chapter 4 challenges for modelling interventions, which has got, at least the one I'm looking at, has got today's date on. And then there's another one with today's date, which Gana and Jasmina have
so she put everything together into a single file, but from my understanding, she was suggesting to work separately on the sections until next week, and then to put them together again, right? So okay.
So Lorenzo, sorry, there's the chapter 4 is the main thing, and then the bit with Gana and Jasmina is a recent extra, which is not yet incorporated in the main draft. But those two together, I think, are pretty much represent the current state of where things are at. And as Daniel says, I think we're at the stage where if people are doing serious drafting, they might well wish to pretty much make quite major changes to a section. So it's probably better that in that case, they draft a separate alternatives section. Is that what you were saying, Daniel?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And other people not doing anymore, like Elena, for example, you were done with the chapter, right? It's all good. I guess people will still edit certain things because like references are not there and so on. I mean, they're.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think it'll be very helpful because it will save work later on if people, as opportunity arises, put their references in. But I mean, references could just go informally at the end of each section. It'll be easy enough to put them all in one place.
Yeah.
Okay. We were discussing references this morning and checking back with the previous volume in this journal. We would prefer the full version of giving a reference. So you say Pellis bracket Pellis, 2014 or something, rather than just having a little number, so in the text. And of course, that means if you don't have time to look up the reference now, at least it's relatively easy to know what you meant.
On the behavioral side, Liz and I have got a very long section that we're hoping to cut down somewhat and choose a few examples. We've so far just been going with links to the papers on the side. So even if it's the same author who's written multiple papers, perhaps even in the same year, there's no confusion. It does make it more informal. That's what we've been going with so far. But it's not quite finished yet, Gana, just to...
But the other general thing to say about references is that, as I think with the previous collection of papers, we're trying to have rather fewer rather than more. I think with covering such wide topics, it would be easy to have a completely unwieldy list of references. So I think we're trying to mainly give key references, not every possible reference you could put.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I suppose the emphasis will be obviously on particularly good papers, but also maybe on one or two, in some cases where there is in sort of reviewish things, which will in turn lead to further references for anyone who cares to look them up.
And that probably also means that we take the mathematical approach. You take the best description of something, not the original papers of the ID, which is a bit nasty to the ones who came with the ID. But yeah, that's.
I have a last question. Did Yasmina mention today when she's on holidays, or not really?
I think it was just today. Really.
I think Jasmina has this. I think poor Jasmina's been working so hard. I think she has an idea of this thing as a holiday. It's a sort of concept in the mind that one of these days there's going to be a holiday. It probably doesn't exist, and it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. Well, if she attended the meeting today, then definitely
We should encourage her to take one.
Well, that's right. She came, she said she'd got 3 meetings between 10 and 11 this morning. So she came to ours for a quarter of an hour or something. Then I think she was going over to one of the others, or maybe both of the others, for a similar amount of time. And then she was worried about this meeting this afternoon and saying that she thought Miriam would be cross if she didn't turn up. So she would turn up just for a little while, but in between those times, I think she was hoping she might be on holiday. So I think
she was supposed to meet me for half an hour this morning, and that was an hour.
Yeah.
So that's why I couldn't come this morning as well.
You took our time.
It's just crazy. Yeah, no holiday.
Okay.
So you should work in Sweden.
She certainly said at another meeting yesterday, I think it was, that she was planning to be working this weekend. So I don't think the holiday is extending very far.
Yeah.
So if you want to be in touch with her, I wouldn't worry.
No, I managed. It was hard actually, but we spoke for 10 minutes maybe yesterday where we discussed some things. I thought, okay, that was good, but okay. I will just write probably next week to see how we can.
What's the weekend?
Okay, I have to go. I was very happy to see you all.
Good to see you, Anna.
And you, Lorenzo, some time that haven't met. And yeah, we stay in touch. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Yeah, I mean, Helena understands the question. What's a weekend? I don't think we had a free weekend in a year or something.
You should work in Sweden, where if you don't take your holiday, your boss starts to pester you.
It's true. They do the same thing in Denmark. It's why I left.
Which holiday is this now?
Have we done it for the moment?
I think it's just the midterm, Daniel.
Yeah, I think it's here. It's half term for the schools.
Okay.
So a lot of people would try and take a little bit of time off while their kids are off school. But given that their kids aren't at school anyway, the concept of half term is sort of slightly different from usual.
Yeah, this week was supposed to be the carnival here in Rio, but then it was cancelled.
So did they do anything? Have they done anything online or?
No, not really.
Sorry, you mean children are at home at the moment in the UK? Is that what you're trying to say? Because it's midterm week. Children are at home.
Yes.
Well, children are permanently at home, aren't they?
Because it's midterm week, right?
I think it's worse because they're at home, but they haven't been set any schoolwork to do. So, so they need entertaining.
Gosh, parents must be exhausted this week.
I don't know. I think, and it's also at UCL at least, it's what we call reading week. So there are no lectures. So I suppose that gives people a slight bit of breathing space, but I don't know whether other people have a week in the middle of the term.
Can I just ask, if I make edits on a document, shall I send it around or put it on the Dropbox?
Probably the easiest thing is to put it in the Dropbox and save it as a separate document with your initials at the end or something.
Cool, thank you.
I mean, it's difficult to know. I think if we, you know, if you're just making a few odd comments, one can almost do it as a comment on track changes on the original thing. But if it's getting, if there's quite a lot of it, it's probably easier. And if you want to sort of start moving stuff around and so on, it's probably better as a separate thing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all. Are we?
Yeah,
Are we done?
I think so. Thank you.
See you
All
next
right,
week.
Dennis, we're going to have a quick word. You wanted.
Yeah.
You can stay on this, or
I'll
do it?
start a new one. Give me 10 minutes. I'll send you.
Okay. Yep, that's good. All right.
Did you
See
want
you
to have
on
a chat with me at all?
If you want to,
I'm happy to.
Lorenzo.
Yeah.
But okay, well we'll stay on here a second then.
Okay.
Okay,
Bye, Daniel.
Bye, Daniel.
Bye,
Thank you
bye.
very much.
sure.
Bye.
I thought we'd probably dealt with your qualms and queries by
Yeah, sorry, I had.
by the general discussion.
I was the one who hasn't read anything and comes in and asks questions. Sorry. I hope they were helpful, though. I agree with you with an organic kind of way of doing it, but I think at some point a bit of coherent.
No, I think they were really useful points, and I think that's why it's good to have, you know, to get an outside view every so often, because you.
And I think Lorenzo, I imagine you are, you know, potential contributors to several of these different papers, and even if you only have time to contribute to one or whatever, if you sort of have a look at some of the drafts of other ones, you may be able to.
Yeah.
You know, you could say, why isn't topic X covered in that paper or something like that, you know.
So I met Jasmina this morning, so we had a few minutes on briefing on this. She was obviously very happy for me to contribute, but at the same time,
to the estimation, you mean, or in general?
So she mentioned, in my mind, you mentioned the estimation, which is one I feel like you really felt some.
Well, I simply meant, you know, I was just going to say, when I answered you, I was just going to say anywhere and everywhere, etc., etc. And then I suddenly thought, well, we've just been talking about this, and you know, it is an area where no, definitely you would fit. So, but it wasn't meant to be at the exclusion of anything else. It was just a gap.
So the way I feel at the moment is estimation. There is a need for a contribution, so I'm happy to kind of try it there. Modeling, I would naturally feel part of it. I quickly read it this morning. There is the section on contact tracing was mostly done by Peter, and he's basically said there is no good model out there, which is true, except for the fact that I've been working this year with Francesca Scarabel. I don't know if you know her. She's an Italian. She was a PhD student with Odo Dickman, and she's been in Canada, and she'll start working for us in a week's time, beginning of March. And she has come up with the first proper model of contact tracing, deterministic model of contact tracing. So it's integral equations, both I think delayed in time and advanced in age since infection. That is the first time I actually see a contact tracing model being done properly. And so I felt that's definitely deserved to be mentioned. I'm not sure whether it's worth like asking Francesca to participate to one of these or something like this, because obviously, like, I don't want to push myself in. Even less, I want to kind of bring someone else in that wasn't there first. She will basically start working for us from next week, or beginning of March, so 2 weeks from now. And
I mean, remembering what's in that bit, if I can. I mean, there's a reference to the work that Jasmina's been doing, which is deterministic. And I think there's a reference to this recent paper by Muller and forget who the other person is. Yeah, so that's the one that Francesca has been talking to Muller, and they have and we spent quite a lot of time to understand what's the difference between her model and Muller's model. And Muller's model is time is in discrete generations,
So he does a mixture between discrete generations and continuous time, which is a bit weird. And it means that it only works for the exponentially growing phase, so the linearized version of the model. And Francesca's equations are for the full epidemic.
I think, as I remember it, Peter's comments about that, and I haven't gone through the paper at all, but I would trust Peter's analysis, was that although the marginal distributions are there in the paper are right, that they've ignored dependence, some sources of dependence in incubation periods, I think it would be.
They've done multiple things and in different papers. So I suspect in the
well, I don't know it. I think it was one particular one that Peter was talking about. Anyway, the point is that there are obviously some things which need to be mentioned. Whether anybody has got a thought, I mean, you were saying again deterministic. So of course, one of the interests, I mean, it would be great to be able to do it properly in a deterministic fashion, but there's still ongoing challenges beyond that to mention about getting something in a stochastic thing. So I guess that it's a question of putting these extra bits into that section, but probably not at great length, I would think.
Yeah, so the things I feel naturally I fall into are modeling, interventions, and the estimation.
Which is fine.
But at the same time, I think Jasmina this morning mentioned data. And I don't know, maybe I should probably kind of, I don't know. I also don't want to kind of take too much on board and then not being able to do anything, because that's unhelpful, I think.
Sure.
Yeah, and as I said, so I know that Helena has been, so I work quite a lot with Liz Fearon. Yeah, obviously I work with Helena. I don't know whether Chris has been involved in any way. Chris is the other postdoc I have, or whether Chris Overton.
No, I don't know that name.
Okay, and then well, Thomas. I don't know whether Thomas is doing anything. Thomas House. No.
I don't think we've seen Thomas.
Yeah.
Maybe right at the beginning of the, almost a year ago, but not.
Yeah, no, it's like literally we're just overwhelmed. But it's been like an incredibly good experience. But in many ways we're like, when you deal in practice with such messy data, then all of the nuances of whether it's a spatial model with a, I mean, if you see something is not pure exponential growth, I know that a spatial model might not show pure exponential growth, but you're like, well, that's most likely kind of interventions that are kind of slowing the growth over time, rather than saying the growth is not purely exponential. So definitely the spatial component is playing a major role. When you kind of deal with direct dirty data, then you tend to be a bit more pragmatic about what the model is. So it's been interesting for other reasons, basically. So Helena obviously is kind of part of it. Chris is also super busy, but so I don't know whether it's worth calling him. But Francesca was thinking she might have something to do about the contact tracing. But certainly I don't want to kind of push myself or other people in, if only if they can be helpful.
Sure. Well, if the groups are not closed, I mean, and we welcome anybody who's got time to read and make some sort of useful comments will be welcomed.
But at the same time, it's not closed, which is good. But at the same time, it can be like total anarchy. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to kind of make sure, with like talking to you and everybody, that it's kind of it's kept in check and it's not like completely crazy. Okay, so I basically have briefly read the modeling paper, which looked good, but I really skim read it in 10 minutes, so I didn't have much to add. There were a couple of things that I wrote down as a thing that who knows where I put it? Yeah. Oh, I just put a couple of comments. I thought about a couple of comments that we could add, but I'll just add it directly to the paper. I don't need to bother with that. I can let you go. Okay. Yeah, no, there's nothing particularly important or interesting right now.
Well, any input you've got time to, but conscious, you are very busy, so probably not spreading your time too thinly.
Yeah, I'll try to help rather than creating more problems, because that's
Thank you.
that's the thing that people want.
Okay,
But, yeah. Oh,
that'd be good.
thank you
Good
guys.
to have your input.
Very nice seeing you.
And you?
How are you doing with these crazy times?
Well, you just keep going, don't you?
Yes.
This has been pretty busy, actually. It's
Okay.
not, I suppose, since the autumn, it's mainly been the trying to get the papers going.
Yeah.
But Dennis and I are trying to sort of keep up with all of them, so it's quite a lot of groups a week.
Yeah.
So that's quite busy.
Thank you, guys. No, I'm just I keep being mindful of other people out there that either have lost their job,
Yeah,
that have nothing to do all the time, or they are trying to keep the job with children in the house. Yeah, I mean,
my impression is that, you know, you've got two lots of people. You've got people who are super busy because, as you say, they've got their job, they've got their children, they're, you know, everything. And you've got other people who don't know how to fill their time and are bored silly. And it's really pulled apart, but I know which camp I'd rather be in. So
Yeah.
I think it must be
which one
dreadful.
I don't know which one I'd rather be in, but
Oh, no, I'd rather be busy.
yeah, no, I agree. I completely agree with that. Yeah, I'm very happy. It's just that literally, it's just working. When
You've been too busy, I suspect.
Yeah, but at times, yes. Partly it's me being unable to manage my time. I'm just not good enough.
Well, been a lot of demands on it.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, learning how to say no, it's also a skill, right? Yeah. And I'm not good at that. Definitely not good at that. Yeah. And also not very good at kind of sticking to a decent sleeping pattern. So
a few years ago, when I was still employed at UCL, and therefore having annual appraisals by the dean or whoever. Yeah. And more or less the last time when I'd sort of given up teaching, I was mainly just doing research thing. I'm supposed to be scaling back. Mm-hmm. So formally I was working, well, I think, you know, for college, I was only working sort of what was meant to be 1 day a week, but turned out to be sort of 4.5 or something. I remember him writing on the appraisal that really he only wanted to make one recommendation, and that was that I should learn to say no. And, you know,
yeah. No,
so I write it on yours as well.
Thank you. I really need it. Thank you, guys. I didn't really want to say anything apart from just catching up and
yeah, it's nice to see you, Lorenzo. I'm glad you got in touch anyway.
Yeah.
And even more glad that you might have a little bit of breathing space, because
yeah, which are clearly filling up with new stuff.
well, don't take on too many.
No. But if I can read, and if I have decent comments and stuff that I feel can contribute, then.
Well, one of the things we did think was that there were quite a lot of people who haven't had time to contribute, as Dennis said, but might, if you present them with something that's already written, you know, they can read it through and say where the gaps are, or, you know, there's a challenge that you haven't thought about, or whatever. Yeah. And that's, you know, that's a really good contribution too. So.
Okay.
All right. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you. Bye. I'll let you kind of.
Okay. Bye then.
Bye. Oh, it's gone. I see that.
Right,
You're on another call. You're on another call. Yeah.
We're on another call by the look of it. Yes. Okay. Bye. I think it's only because this one is recorded.
Oh, I see. Good point. Yeah. Fair enough. Bye.